Up next in the broadcast, what gets added, what gets cut in next year's government budget, which is closely tied to the president's plans to increase national happiness and boost economic growth. The United States and Russia have reached an agreement on a UN Security Council resolution that would lay the path towards getting rid of Syria's chemical weapons. Iran continues high-level discussions on its nuclear program to address international concerns over the intentions of its nuclear capabilities. Primetime News begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Friday, September 27th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hae.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. The Korean government's budget proposal for next year has stirred up a fair share of controversy in the nation, provoking criticism over plans to scale back President Park's welfare pledges.
Taking responsibility for the backlash, the nation's health and welfare minister offered to resign on Friday, only to be turned down by the president. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Jin-ju reports.
Health and Welfare Minister Chin Young offered his resignation on Friday, taking responsibility for not being able to fulfill President Park Geun-hye's key welfare pledges, especially those related to basic pension payouts. In an email sent to reporters, Chin apologized for causing concern to the public and extended his best wishes for the health of the Korean people and the success of the Park administration. However, President Park immediately turned down his resignation through Prime Minister Chung Hong-won. Chung, in a statement, said the government couldn't accept his resignation ahead of a parliamentary inspection into the administration and at a time when there are so many pending issues to solve. He asked Chin to stay in his post at least until the National Assembly's regular session is over. Chung's comments come in line with President Park's remarks at Thursday's cabinet meeting, during which the government unveiled its budget proposal for 2014. The president ordered her cabinet members to work together to overcome and solve the economic hardships currently facing the government so that the public can appreciate their dedicated efforts. Minister Chin has not appeared at the health ministry all day. With the president having turned down his resignation, it is unclear as of now as to what Chin will do. Should he insist on stepping down and start a tug-of-war with the presidential office of Cheongwade, it will likely spark controversy in the political arena. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
The Korean government has unveiled a proposal for next year's budget plan, which totals roughly $330 billion US. And to support the president's campaign pledges, about a third is allotted for welfare programs.
That may be the largest allocation for health and welfare sector in the nation's history, but due to tax revenue shortfall, budgets for major welfare pledges, including basic pension and cutting college tuition, were scaled back from the original plans.
But as much emphasis as the Park Geun-hye administration put on her welfare schemes, it also placed importance on stimulating the economy. For this and more, we have Arirang News' Hwang Ji-hae joining us in the studio. Hello.
Hello, guys.
Well, Ji-hae, so what parts of this budget focus on stimulating the economy?
Well, there are several plans that focus on boosting the economy, and the government had expected to significantly reduce its projected spending on social overhead capital, including on roads, schools, and public parks, by 13%, but only did so by a mere 4.3%, down to $21 billion next year. The government also wants to boost investment through its budget plan. It calls for increased financial support for local small and medium-sized companies by $12 billion and plans to create a $1 billion fund for new growth engine industries. The budget plan includes a more than $9 billion rise in financial support for local exporters as well.
So, Chia, will these budget plans help the Korean economy regain its footing?
Well, experts say that remains unclear despite government efforts to stimulate the economy. They say the budget draft for next year is mainly focused on welfare and that the total projected expenditures did not rise as much as last year.
The government said that it wanted to raise spending by 4.6% next year, which is down from a more than 5% rise last year. The budget plan would not have a major impact on fostering growth in the local economy, especially when the growth outlook for the global economy remains bleak.
Well, these ambitious goals also come at a time when the Korean government doesn't have as much money to work with.
You're right, Sean. The government said it planned to increase expenditures in 2014, but keep in mind that next year's government revenue is expected to drop 0.5% from 2013, the first decline in 4 years. If revenue does in fact drop and the budget plans move forward as is, the government would end up running a fiscal deficit in 2014 of 1.8% of the country's GDP. And as our Yoo Ji-hae reports, the national debt is going to surpass the worrying milestone of around $480 billion next year.
There has been growing concern the country's sovereign debt is increasing at an alarming pace, and the government's proposal for next year's budget envisages a further rise, stoking concerns about the country's fiscal health. The finance ministry said on Friday that the government's debt is projected to surpass 500 trillion won, or about $480 billion next year, a rise of 7% from this year. It's an 8-fold increase since 1997, when the nation was hit by the Asian financial crisis. But officials say a deficit is inevitable next year because government spending is necessary to boost a still moribund economy. The nation's debt is now forecast to reach a record high of 36.5% of GDP, which appears to be at a manageable level compared to the OECD average of 108%. But it's another story when taking into account debt held by state companies or payment guarantees offered by the government for various debt finance projects. That's because their combined liabilities far exceed the total government debt, and their debt loads could potentially pose a serious risk if Korea faces an economic crisis in the future.
The sovereign debt is at a manageable level for now, but if there is a sharp rise in social welfare costs, or if tax revenues dwindle from worsening economic conditions, Korea could well follow the footsteps of the likes of Japan and Southern Europe.
Government policymakers say they are working on measures to control the public debt, but they have yet to present a convincing plan. Yoo Ji-hae, Arirang News.
Now, one option on the table to tackle deficiency of revenue is a tax hike, but President Park Geun-hye during her presidential campaign vowed that there won't be any raises in tax. So what's she going to do?
You're right, Ji-hae. She doesn't plan to raise any taxes, but so there will be cuts in public spending. The government is working hard to scale back spending in the public sector, to reduce tax exemptions and to crack down on underground economic activity in order to boost its tax base. But experts say the moves won't be enough to make ends meet and that raising taxes could be an option down the road.
Okay, Hwang Ji-hae, thanks so much for the breakdown of the budget challenges ahead.
You're welcome.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features restrictions is on the rise. Closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature, circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report, less than
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Came on maneuver trying to cover up the South's true intentions. And at the National Assembly, the ruling and the main opposition parties have reached an agreement on the legislative calendar.
It's also a major step toward resuming parliamentary business that has been stalled for more than 3 weeks. Our Kwon So-ah explains.
The ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition Democratic Party on Friday agreed to normalize operations at the National Assembly starting Monday. The breakthrough was reached after the ruling party agreed to hold an emergency session over the sudden resignation of Prosecutor General Chae Dong-wook, as per the opposition party's request. The Prosecutor General offered to resign from his post 2 weeks ago, immediately after the Justice Ministry said it would investigate reports that he had a son out of wedlock. Chae has denied the allegations and has filed a lawsuit against the Daily that reported them in early September. The Democratic Party has argued that the presidential office pulled strings to force Tae's resignation because it was not happy with his handling of allegations that the National Intelligence Service interfered in last year's presidential election. The ruling party opposed the idea of holding an emergency session over questions about the case, but yielded to the opposition party's demand at the last minute so that parliamentary business could resume. The session about the matters related to the top prosecutor's resignation is set to take place on Tuesday. From October 14th to November 2nd, the National Assembly will carry out an audit of government offices. On November 8th, a full assembly session will be convened to vote on whether the parliament approves of how the government executed its budget last year. From November 12th, lawmakers will have a 5-day interpellation session to question the government on a wide spectrum of issues. Before agreeing to resume parliamentary business, the rival parties also wrangled over the issue of creating a special parliamentary committee to lead efforts to reform the nation's spy agency. But the two parties have agreed to put that issue aside for now, while continuing discussions on it in the meantime. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel will arrive in Seoul this weekend for military talks with his South Korean counterpart Kim Kwon-jin and other top officials.
During the 45th Security Consultative meeting set for next Wednesday, the two sides are expected to focus on discussing the possible delay of a planned transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, currently slated for 2015. The two defense chiefs last shared views on the issue in Brunei a month ago, but failed to reach a compromise on the issue. The two sides will also assess the current situation in North Korea and come up with a customized South Korea-U.S. deterrence strategy against Pyongyang's nuclear threats. Now, during his 4-day visit, Hagel is scheduled to take part in various military events before heading to Japan. Now, North Korea is widely believed to have made progress with its nuclear program in recent months, fanning fears that the world's most isolated regime could carry out a fourth nuclear test.
For more on the daunting speculation, our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee sat down with North Korea expert Scott Snyder.
So we're seeing a flurry of reports that North Korea may be actively developing its nuclear technology. What's your take on that?
Well, I think the signs are clear that North Korea does continue to try to develop its program. We've seen reports that the reactor at Yongbyon might be starting up, that the North Koreans continue to do motor tests to improve their missile program. And so even though they are not conducting a nuclear test or a missile test every day, it doesn't mean that they are not working on the program every day.
So does that mean that the international sanctions are not working?
Well, it means that the sanctions are, I think they're necessary but insufficient by themselves to prevent North Korea from continuing to work on its program.
So should we be expecting a fourth nuclear test to take place soon?
Well, I don't know what the North Koreans have in mind, but there's no reason to think that the North Koreans have decided not to conduct further nuclear tests.
So if a fourth nuclear test takes place, what should we expect from the international community?
We see following the third nuclear test that there is a new resolution, and we've seen new will on the part of China to more effectively implement some sanctions. So I think that possibly we might be talking about resolutions that authorize the same level of sanctions pressure on North Korea that we see being applied to Iran right now.
And meanwhile, what should the six-party member countries be doing?
Well, I think that basically the main requirement for resuming six-party talks is for North Korea to come back to where it was in 2008 when we were having six-party meetings. And that means explicitly stating a commitment to abandon nuclear weapons and to back that up by actions. No more nuclear testing, no more missile testing, and a recommitment to implementation of the framework for denuclearization.
Lastly, do you think North Korea will ever give up its nuclear program?
Well, the reality is that states that have tested have not given up their programs in the absence of a change in the leadership of those countries. So I think that what the United States and the other countries are trying to achieve through six-party talks is actually unprecedented. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, but it does mean that what we're trying, the outcome that we seek, would be a completely new outcome based on current experience with states that have tested nuclear devices.
Well, thank you for your insight, Dr. Snyder.
Over in New York, ending weeks of diplomatic deadlock, the United States and Russia have agreed on a draft UN security resolution aimed at ridding Syria of its chemical weapons stockpile. The measure, which went into the full Security Council on Thursday, could be voted on as early as Friday. Our Kim Yeon-ji reports.
The draft UN resolution, which brings to an end weeks of diplomatic deadlock, legally obligates Syria to give up its chemical stockpile.
And we did reach agreement with respect to the resolution, but it's our hope that that process between the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons and the United Nations and its resolution can now move forward and give life, hopefully, to the removal and destruction of chemical weapons from Syria.
But the measure does not provide any means of automatic enforcement with sanctions or military force, according to Reuters. A major sticking point between Russia and Western powers before reaching an agreement was whether the resolution would be under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which allows the Council to enforce its decisions with sanctions or military force. Russia, a close ally of Syria, had opposed putting it under Chapter 7. China, which has backed Russia when it comes to vetoing Council resolutions on Syria, once again took sides with Moscow. As a result, Western powers and the Security Council backed away from many of their initial demands. The only reference to enforcement in the draft is a threat that if Syria fails to follow through, the Council would then impose punitive measures under Chapter 7. But this would require a second resolution, which Russia could veto again. Despite the seemingly major concession, a U.S. State Department official hailed the deal as a breakthrough. Washington and Moscow had agreed to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons in the wake of a sarin gas strike on civilians in the suburbs of Damascus last month, the world's deadliest chemical weapons attack in 25 years. Kim Yeon-ji, Arirang News.
The devil may be in the details, but it appears a window of opportunity has opened to deal with Iran's nuclear program. The foreign ministers of the U.S. and European allies met with Iran's top diplomat on Thursday, which marked the first direct contact between Washington and Tehran in 6 years. Kim Ji-yeon has more.
Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif met with his U.S. counterparts and the other 4 permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany, which make up the so-called P5+1, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly on Thursday.
Discussions were very substantive, businesslike. We hope to be able to make progress towards resolving this issue in a timely fashion, based on respecting the rights of the Iranian people.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry also said the meeting went well, but warned that there was a lot of work to be done. Iran and the P5+1 agreed to hold another round of talks on the issue on October 15th and 16th in Geneva. Since the election of the new Iranian President Hassan Rouhani in June, Iranian officials have tried to reach out to the West and the international community in order to address concerns over its nuclear programs. Earlier, Rouhani said that no country should possess nuclear arms and added that it was necessary to establish a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. The U.S. and Iran severed diplomatic ties in 1980 after the outbreak of the Islamic Revolution in Iran the year before. And the last meeting between an American and Iranian leader was in 1977. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And back here in the nation, Korea's main getaway, Incheon International Airport, broke ground on its second terminal. It is slated for completion just before the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018. Our Kim Young-gil tells us more.
Top-ranked Incheon International Airport is getting a second terminal to handle the ever-increasing volume of passengers and cargo into Korea.
In order for Incheon International Airport to become a global hub and Northeast Asia's leading airport, we must upgrade not just the airport's capacity, but also its facilities and equipment.
The terminal is slated for completion in 2017, just in time for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018. The airport opened its doors to the world in March 2001, and since then it has handled some 44 million passengers and 4.5 million tons of cargo every year. If the trend continues, the airport is expected to become saturated around 2017. The new terminal will handle an extra 18 million passengers and 1.3 million tons of cargo per year, giving the airport a total capacity of 62 million passengers and 5.8 million tons of cargo.
The new facility will be located in front of the existing one and will include a passenger terminal and an air traffic control center with a total area of 384,000 square meters, which is equivalent to approximately 53 soccer fields.
The cost is estimated at roughly $2 billion. The airport was ranked the 8th busiest airport in the world in terms of international passengers in 2010, and was ranked by Airports Council International the world's best airport for 7 consecutive years from 2005 to 2012. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Tennis star Rafael Nadal made a stop here in South Korea for a promotional tour ahead of his next tournament in China.
And Stephen Che joins us from the Sports Center to tell us more about his visit. Stephen.
Hey guys, the world's second-ranked tennis player Rafael Nadal returned to Korea for the first time in 7 years, and he took the time to meet with his fans and teach a lesson on the game. Here on a promotional tour for one of his main sponsors, Kia Motors, Nadal showed up at the Walker Hill Hotel in Seoul to mingle with his fans, give out signatures, and conduct a short lesson on his killer left forehand. And after the U.S. Open champ shared a rally with 15-year-old prospect Lee Duck-hee, the Spaniard said that Lee could one day become a great player. Nadal's next step in Asia is in Beijing for the China Open, which starts on September 30th. Moving on, football fans are highly anticipating South Korea's upcoming friendly versus Brazil. More than 15,000 tickets were sold in 2 hours on Friday morning as fans scrambled to not only support the home team, but also to see the stars line up for the Brazilian squad. FC Barcelona striker Neymar headlines the 8th-ranked team in the world, along with side-back Dani Alves, defender Marcelo, and winger Oscar, amongst others. The match will be played at Seoul's World Cup Stadium on October 12th. Finally, it's time to talk about Friday's top KBO matchup. The Lotte Giants and the Samsung Lions squared off in Daegu. The Giants trying to meddle with the Lions' playoff hunt, and we go straight to the third. Lotte's Cho Hong-seok smacks a floater. The center fielder drops it. Then Park Gan-hee drops it. Cho rounds third. It's 1-0. Now we go on to the fifth. It's Samsung's Park Seok-min. He hits one home, then goes to third as one more scores. Then the catcher, he throws to second but allows Park to come home. Scores are up 3-1 Lions. The Giants score 2 in the 6th to tie it up, and they go on to win in the 10th with a final score of 4-3. And looking at the scores from around the league, NC defeats Hanwha 3-2, and Kia and SK are still playing this one in the top of the 12th. Scores are 1-1. That does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
It was sunny this afternoon, but it appears that clouds have begun to move in.
Let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, I hear it's going to rain all day on Sunday.
Yes, there is another round of autumn rain in the forecast. First, let's move on to our satellite map. The nation is at the edge of a high pressure front from the East Sea. This is why we're seeing heavy clouds covering the skies. Now, tomorrow night and Sunday are both shaping up to be rainy ones, so it is recommended that you complete any outdoor activities planned by tomorrow afternoon. A heads up for those of you in the south coast regions where there may be over 100 millimeters of rain, and it looks like this round of rain will gradually come to an end by Monday morning. Taking a closer look at tomorrow's forecast, rainy Seoul and Daegu will hit 21 and 24 degrees respectively. Meanwhile, cloudy Daegu and Busan should peak in the mid-20s. Moving on to other regions, it looks like it's also going to rain in Daejeon and Jeju with highs of 21 and 26 degrees respectively, and Kumgang tops out at 16. Well, that's all I have for you this hour, but join me for another update after midnight.
And that's our broadcast on this Friday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.